Welcome to Veteran Resource Podcast, where you will meet nonprofit organizations focused on improving the lives of veterans and their family members. Here is your host, Jeremy Paris.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 11 of the Veteran Resource Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Paris, and today we have Jonathan Way of the Telling Project on. But first, many of you out there know John Lee Dumas, or have at least heard of his podcast, Entrepreneur on Fire. Well, this week's episode of the Veteran Artist Program podcast features JLD himself, and B.R. McDonald pulls out so much information that you've never heard him talk about on any other podcast. This is not JLD, the podcaster, or JLD, the entrepreneur. This is JLD, the veteran artist. And he's talking about the Lord of the Rings type fiction book that he wrote completely while deployed as an Army officer. So make sure you check out vappodcast.com. That's VAPPODCAST.com to hear that episode. Today's interview runs a little bit long, so I'm not going to read any of my reviews today, but I'll have some more for you next week, I promise. Jonathan Way, the founder and director of the Telling Project, is a playwright, writer, and producer. Jonathan's dramatic work has been staged at the Guthrie Theater, Library of Congress, Maryland Center for the Performing Arts, Lisner Auditorium in Washington, D.C., and Portland Center Stage in Portland, Oregon, among others. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in the Village Voice, Iowa Review, and the North American Review and Glimmer Train, and his work featured by the New York Times, Washington Post, Baltimore Sun, Inside Higher Ed, the Associated Press, and NPR. He has received support from the Bob Woodruff Foundation, National Endowment for the Arts, the Smithsonian Institute, the Library of Congress, Metabolic Studios, Minnesota Humanities Center, Humanities Iowa, Oregon Humanities Center, and others. Jonathan lives with his family in Austin, Texas. Okay, let's dive right into the interview. Welcome, Jonathan, to the Veteran Resource Podcast. Glad to have you on.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem. It's a pleasure for sure. I wanted to find out more about your backstory, but before I do, can you please tell me a little bit more about the Telling Project, just a brief overview of what it is?
Yeah, sure. So basically, the core of the project is that we work with communities to create performances in which military veterans and military family members from that community have the opportunity to tell their stories of life and the military for their fellow community members. And basically, it's, at heart, what we're trying to do is give military veterans, active military, and military family members the opportunity to represent themselves to their communities.
Excellent. Okay, now let's put the spotlight on you, Jonathan. Can you tell me a little bit about what you were like before the Telling Project? Were you always a writer? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so I'd been writing for years and years and years before I got involved with the Telling Project, or before we started the Telling Project. Fiction, that was what I had my graduate degree in. That's what I had taught in various capacities. I had, published any number of stories in various publications around the country and over the years. And I was at the University of Oregon doing that. My wife was also in the MFA program there. She was also studying fiction. She was at the university. I was working for the university as a student advisor, and I got involved with a then fledgling student veterans organization. That was in 2005. And that was really the first time I had spent much time with vets. But I should say, to kind of back that up, as an artist, I started working as a musician initially, and then I was working as a photographer for a while. And my first mentor as a photographer, who was really enormously responsible for my being an artist, was a Vietnam vet who had done 2 tours as a Navy petty officer, and between 1960, I think 62 was his first, and then he got out finally in 1968, and then spent the next 15 years in Southeast Asia as a photo correspondent, and had just gotten back to the United States for maybe the second time, I think it was, since he had been in the military, and was teaching at the Oregon School of Arts and Crafts. I was living in Portland at that time, and I just, I was there by coincidence at the same time. I was working as a lab assistant and taking some classes, and I met him. And his, the way he spoke about his experiences in uniform, and the way that and it wasn't necessarily specifically his experiences in uniform, but the way he spoke about them, and the way that his perspective on them, and how thoughtful he was, were really hugely influential for me in terms of actually even becoming an artist of any kind.
Oh, wow.
So there's an interesting that was an interesting kind of underlay that I didn't really think about when I started the Telling Project a whole lot. But as I have worked with veterans over the last many years, that has been something that, I've returned to as kind of a thing, as a kind of an inspiration, but also a kind of foundation for the kinds of work that I'm doing, the kinds of stories that I hear, and just, for me, the fundamental significance of the work that we're doing.
You mentioned that you did photography, you were a musician, and you're a writer. Not creative at all, huh?
It's like, it's always been fundamental, to who I am. And I think it just took me a long time to kind of, and actually, to say that it's taken me a long time to find a modality that I wanted to work in. I have no idea if this is going to be what I end up doing for the rest of my life. In fact, if the previous 50 years of my life have any kind of indicator, I'm sure it won't be. I will do other things as well. It's a kind of it's exciting to be doing this work. It's really wonderful to be doing stage work, which I had never done before we started this project. But I also know that my brain is a restless one, and I'll find other ways to do this, and I'll probably do some other work as well before all is said and done.
Excellent. Did you have any other connections to the military in your family, or was it just the mentor?
None. And that's kind of an interesting thing about this, is that, when I started working with vets at the University of Oregon, so there's a bunch of stuff in there that is sort of interesting and telling, and a little, well, it's not embarrassing, but it's I think it's poignant. So when I started working, I was working in student affairs, and basically what we do, that department handles all kinds of parts of a student's experience that don't happen in the classroom. And so what we were doing is, I was an advisor to several student groups, all of whom were non-traditional students. In other words, students who were older, students who had families, students who had jobs. And of course, students coming out of the military fell into that category in any number of different ways. And it was 2005 when I took over. And the week before I took over that position, Senator Ron Wyden was having a press conference on campus, and they were talking about education policy. And there was a whole slew of press there, of course. And the vice president of student affairs was there as well. And he was an interim vice president. He had just taken over the position. So one of the reporters asked Senator Wyden, "What are you guys doing to prepare for this next generation of veterans who have been serving in combat to come back to the university with, GI benefits, and how are you going to handle that?" And, it was a stupid question because it was kind of loaded, and there was all kinds of, preconceptions in the question, like, this was a group of people who needed to be handled in some way. But B, it was also kind of, it caught him by surprise. So rather than saying, well, blah, 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 and doing the usual politician thing and coming up with an answer off the cuff, he just turned to the VP of Student Affairs, who was going to be my boss, my super boss, like three levels above me, and said, well, I don't know, what are we doing? And
Oh, man.
and what his answer was, well, we just hired a new coordinator of non-traditional students, and that was me. And he's going to be taking over next week and doing this. And Ron Wyden said, I want his name on my desk by Monday morning.
Oh, wow.
That was the week before I started, which actually, of course, never happened. I mean, I met Ron Wyden a couple times while I was doing this stuff, but so it was a lot of posturing. But it was all to illustrate. I came into the position when all this attention was being focused on student veterans, and all the attention was completely it was just poorly informed. So, the first steps in our student affairs department's preparation for the return of veterans to campus was to try and put into place an emergency response policy, because the sort of conception of how that was going to impact the return, how that was going to impact the campus, was that we were going to have a bunch of crazy vets who were going to be freaking out.
Wow.
Yeah. And, to plead mea culpa, I wasn't that much more informed. I thought that was kind of stupid, but I was also kind of like, well, but maybe that's what we need. Mm. So the first week I was actually in the position, I got approached by a young vet, and he said, listen, I want to start a social club for vets. It's a little isolating on campus right now. Can we do that? And so I said, sure, and started working with him. We put together this group, and within a year it had gone from 6 original members to 125 active members.
Wow.
And it had transitioned from being a social organization to being a service organization. It was really cool. And what I realized, a few months into working, and it took me a few months because I'm slow, was that we had this completely backwards. That what the university was doing was trying to kind of respond to this group of damaged individuals and provide them with services and provide them with emergency this and emergency that. And that was great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But it took me, 2 to 3 months to understand that these folks were they were an immense asset to the university. They were focused, they were service oriented, they had a tremendous amount of energy. And the university life, which is full of unstructured time, just tons of unstructured time, was anathema to most of these folks. They were coming off of active duty, a year, 2 or 3 years in the past, and they were just used to being active. They were used to doing stuff all day, every day, and you just and having a list of things that you were to do, and you were moving down that list. You checked stuff off. You made sure, and the list was not it wasn't study, brush my teeth, go to a party. It was what do you do for the community? What do you do for this? What do you do for that? Big, important tasks. And so what we started doing as we transitioned from being a social organization to being a service organization was we just started doing campus outreach and service projects. And these guys were amazing. They went from being from being a non-existent group to being the second most active group in terms of programming and service projects on campus within a year. And the only one that was more active was the Women's Center. And the Women's Center had been around at the University of Oregon for 40 years at that point. They had a budget of $125,000 a year or something like that. They had their own center. They had 500 active members. I mean, they were just and one of the things we did was we paired this, the Vets organization with the Women's Center from the beginning, because we knew that the Women's Center was going to be able to give these folks a lot of access to elements of the campus that they were feeling somewhat isolated from, and they were doing a ton of stuff which these folks could participate in as well. So it was kind of awesome. For me, what came out of that was that I came to understand that I didn't know who was serving in uniform. I didn't know what they had been doing. And I didn't know like what that meant for the community, for the community back home. And if I didn't know that, and I was working with these folks, I'd been working with them for a few years, and if I didn't know that, then nobody knew it. Like, nobody was understanding this stuff. Everybody was sort of, there was every day, of course, the headline was about vets, or was about, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, or about, one or another of the sort of half dozen issues that always surround the military, like budget and like politics and right. I mean, you know what they are. Everybody knows what they are who's in the military, and you just kind of roll your eyes. That was what everybody knew, but that was just incredibly limited, and it didn't matter how hard you tried. I mean, I read 3 papers every morning. I considered myself an incredibly engaged citizen, and what I just was stunning to me was how ignorant I was. And so one of the main things that we started doing was doing outreach, trying to actually find places that we could start some meaningful conversations between the civilian population and the military population. Because it seemed, it did a bunch of things. It raised the level of the discourse in terms of the community in general. Mm-hmm. And it made for a less isolated veteran experience both in Eugene and at the university. So both in the community at large and at the university community level as well. And just kind of created more opportunities for everybody, to kind of to interact.
Yeah, and that seems to have played directly into the Telling Project. Right.
So when I was on my way out of the University of Oregon, because my wife was graduating and we were going to move here to Austin, I woke up one morning and I came up with this idea, and I turned to my wife, because we'd been trying to do these efforts. And you know how it works. Like, usually when you do this stuff, the same group of people shows up. And they're people who already have some interest in the military. They're people who are already either in themselves or family members, or they're just, they have an avocational interest. And so the conversation can be great, but it's usually the same people who are having the conversation. And so we've been trying to come up with ways to get different demographics in. And I woke up one morning and I turned to my wife and I said, you know what? I think what we should do we should put together a play and have these folks' stories acted out on stage, but I want them to do it. I want them to do the acting.
And you had no stage experience at that point whatsoever?
None.
Wow, that's incredible.
None. No. Well, yeah, it's a little crazy is what it is. But I'd put on a really great event earlier that year working with the head of the theater department at the University of Oregon. And so this was kind of like, a bunch of things had to fall in place for this to happen. And one of them was that he had to get on board. So next day or 2 days later, I made an appointment with him and sat down with him and I said, listen, John, we had this great thing. And I'm wondering if you want to try this. And it just so happened, his name was John Schmore. It just so happened that his area of focus is this kind of theater called devised theater. And devised theater is when you get a group of people together and you work with one another to create a piece of some kind. That's his research area. That's where he'd done a ton of work, and he'd been in the theater department at that point for 20 some odd years. And he said, "Sure, that sounds weird and a little crazy. Let's do it." And so that was a big piece. And then another piece was that a friend of mine who Max Reynard, who now works for us full time. I had met him through this other event that I'd put on as well. And we'd had a lot of conversations, and he'd done a bunch of theater, especially writing for the theater in South Africa and working with testimony, working with transcripts from the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in South Africa in the wake of the fall of apartheid. And that was, not what I was thinking of in terms of how the material was going to be, but it was what I was thinking about in terms of the process. We were going to have to get this from, raw story to performance somehow. And that was kind of, that was how I was thinking about this. So I talked to Max about it. And he was also interested. So that was piece number 2. And then, of course, the third piece, which was the most crucial piece, was getting the vets themselves on board. And so I waited until actually the day after I quit my position at the University of Oregon, because I wanted this to be an independent project and I wanted not to have any kind of constraints on it. And set up a meeting with, so it was their weekly meeting, and I went in, and there 30 vets there, and they all knew me at this point. We were really good friends, and I was moving to Austin, Texas. I knew I was going to do that. But I wanted to just put this out there because I really like these folks. We'd done some great stuff together over the last few years, and this was kind of like a last thing. We could do this. I would commute from Austin, on a somewhat semi-regular basis to keep shepherding this process through, and we could see if we could, make one last effort to really reach out to a crowd that we'd just been unable to reach before. And so I went to the meeting. And I said, listen, this is a crazy idea, and it's going to take a ton of work, and nobody really knows what we're doing. And the end result is that it's going to, you're going to have this like totally intimidating experience of having to get up on stage and talk about yourself, and we don't know if anybody's going to show up. But, here's the thinking. People who we want to be reaching go to theater.
Right.
They do, I mean, not everybody, obviously, but there is, the theater going crowd is a big part of the demographic that in Eugene, especially, we wanted to reach. So I said, and by calling it theater and by, using this theatrical kind of process, I think that we may have a chance to get these people in. Who knows whether it's going to work or not, but it's worth a try, I think. And to a person, they were like, yeah, let's do it. That to me was incredibly gratifying. Like, and not just gratifying, but like, I just, again, I'd had such a good experience working with these folks for the previous 2 years that I wasn't surprised. But it was, again, a kind of affirmation of just the kind of quality of the people that I was working with. Just there's tremendous character and willingness there, and energy. And so we actually, we spent that summer, I hadn't left yet. So we spent that summer interviewing these folks in advance, to prepare for this. So the process, but I'll explain it here.
Please do. Yeah.
So we interviewed them, record the interviews, transcribe those interviews verbatim, and then excerpt those transcripts to create the script. And we use only the transcripts of the people who are on stage to do that. We actually used a few other transcripts in this first one. And then after that, subsequent to that, just decided we're not going to use anybody else's stories, just the people on stage. But in the first one, there were a couple of things that came from other people's stories, and they agreed to it, and they were perfectly fine with doing that. But we decided subsequent to that it was best just to stick with the people who were there. At any rate, we interviewed, I think, 26 people for the first project, and we had 13 cast members for the original performances. And we worked, it took from the beginning of the interview process, which was in June, we didn't go to stage until the following February. So it was like 9 months. It was like ridiculously long, incredibly inefficient. I'm sure we made every mistake that we could have made. But we also had this incredibly enthusiastic group of vets and veterans' families, military family members, who just they just put so much time into this thing, and they put so much effort into it. And we got down to the week of the performance the following February, and we'd gotten some good advance press because it was just kind of a weird thing. First of all, it was a vet thing. It was a military thing. And, that commanded a certain amount of attention in the press. But more than that, it was a military arts thing, which nobody was doing at that point. This was in 2008. And not only was nobody doing it, but it was like performance. It wasn't photography, combat photography, or paintings, or, it was like live, and that was really weird.
Right.
So we got some good advance press, but that hadn't, we'd gotten press for other events that we'd put on, and nobody showed up anyway. So we didn't know, we had no idea what was going to happen. And there's just, there's some great stories that come out of all that. But basically, we show up the night of the first performance. We've built a stage in the upstairs of the Veterans Memorial Association Hall in downtown Eugene. We hung like lights from the plumbing on the ceiling. We put up a backdrop curtain, we tack it up with like staple guns. I mean, this whole thing is like, it's just like we're putting it together. We put the whole thing together.
Wow.
And then we put up chairs and we're like, it's this big open space room and it has a capacity of 400. That's like fire capacity. We put up 150 chairs because we're like, we don't want it to seem empty. And we opened the doors for a 7:00 show, we opened the doors at 6:15 or something like that. By 6:45, we put up the rest of the 400 chairs and we had to close the doors.
Oh my God.
There were so many people. It was just, and we did that for 3 shows running. And these guys were just freaking amazing. I mean, they got up there, they just bled their hearts out on that stage, and people responded so strongly. And in ways that I'd never seen anyone respond to, both theater, but also just any of the stuff that we had done. It was like, it was a really, really powerful and really moving. And one very poignant reaction that we had the Oregon Peace Institute come for the first night's performance. And they were very respectful to a certain degree. They said, do you mind if we hand out flyers? Do you mind if we hand out leaflets? And I said, well, we said, you can do that after the show, but we want you to see the show first. We want you to know what you're handing out flyers at before that. And they were like, okay, no problem. They were very agreeable to that. And then, these guys got up there, they did their thing. And it wasn't, how these things work, Jeremy. There's never a single attitude up on stage. There's never a single political notion. And that stuff oftentimes, even when it is a part of a performance, it's very individual and it's very respectful and it's generally like, it's really thoughtful and presented in a way that we don't see in the public arena very often.
Yeah.
And afterwards, we did a reception outside and people were hanging around and cast came out and, everybody was talking. And I was standing next to this group of people from the Oregon Peace Institute. And I overheard one of them saying, I kind of wish I hadn't seen that because it makes doing this a lot more complicated.
Huh.
And that to me was like an indicator that we had done something important, that we had done something that was not happening elsewhere. And it's not that I don't think that they should do that work. I think that they should, if they feel that if that's something that, they have a strong conviction about, they should do it. But nobody should be doing work pro, anti, whatever in a bubble.
Right.
And I think that that's what we had managed to do was to some degree pop that bubble.
Yeah.
So we did those 3 shows. Everyone was like that. Sold out all of them. Like, just and for me it was a one-off. Again, I'd loved working with these folks and I wanted to do this last effort to see if we could do something. And it was a great effort and we had this wonderful success. And I, figured that was it and we were going to all move on. And then I started getting emails and phone calls the next week from, folks who had connection to people who had participated or in the audience, or people who had just picked up on the press and they wanted to do more productions in different places. And at that point, I had no idea what that even meant. It was like, I don't know. I'd worked with the theater department and excellent collaborators in Eugene. And, I knew what the process was that we had formulated, but it wasn't, it was still the Wild West.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
We got some really enthusiastic people and they were willing to kind of take whatever risks and help with the kind of, as we hammered out the details and the ways that the process worked. And, as of last year, as of this spring, actually, as of this year, 2015, we did our 28th project. We've performed X hundred and some X number of times. We've put over 160 vets and military family members on stage. We've been in 25 cities, 18 states, And what we're looking forward to this year is we're going to be from May to May, our production schedule, we're going to be doing at least a dozen more projects this year.
Oh, great.
And maybe more than that. And yeah, and it's just, I guess that what was illustrated that those first performances to me was that there actually is a real hunger for some kind of connection to the military and to who the military is and what they're doing that isn't getting satisfied anywhere else.
Yeah, the need is there.
And there's the opportunity for, actual connection is limited, and it's much less limited now than when we started this work, which is great because there are a lot more veterans and military members and well-intended civilians like myself who are doing work like this, but it's still limited, and the fact of the matter is that, that doing it on a community level, which is how we do it, that's even more limited. It's hard to start conversations between neighbors for whatever reason, and there's no judgment there. It's just, that's the way we have evolved as a society. And, what we are trying to do is just that.
Well, I think a part of that comes from, and you alluded to it a few times, but basically I was in one of the performances of Telling Baltimore, and the experience for me was that when I started, Max was the writer on that one, and he wanted to take down my story. And I went kind of as a favor to BR, who said, hey, can you, come in and be a part of this? And I had worked with the Telling Project on a couple of the previous ones, so I knew what it was all about, and I loved every one that I've seen, and I desperately wanted to be a part of it, but I felt I had no story.
Right.
I mean, I was in for 10 years in the Army, and I was in during 1990 to 2000. I never went to war or anything like that. So when everybody nowadays is talking about the military, it's, oh, well, where did you get, deployed to?
Right.
Which war did you fight in? What did you do over there? And I always felt like I have no story. So when I came in to talk to Max, I started out by saying, I just want to tell you, I hope I'm not wasting your time. I don't think I have a story. And he started laughing and he said, you have no idea how many times I hear that. But
almost everybody. Almost everybody we interview. Like, I don't know if I have anything you want to hear.
I don't know if this is it.
Yep.
Exactly. And so he said, tell you what, I'm going to press record. We'll just talk for a while. And at the end, we'll see what we have. And I was like, okay. And by the end, he was like, so what do you think now? And I was like, wow, and that has helped me as a veteran so much because now I have that story. Now I know what my military career was all about. And when people are talking about it, I don't just, stay quiet anymore. I have a story that I can share with people. And I think that that's helping, going back to what you were saying, in the community. I think it's not just, people not wanting to talk to each other about it. I think that a lot of it is people not knowing how to talk about it, not realizing what their experience was without, taking the time to kind of pull it all out and digest it the way that you do when you're going through the process of setting up for one of these shows.
That's very cool. And it's very cool to hear you put it so well, Jeremy, because, we see the process from our end of things. And from our end of things, it's like, we sit down with these folks and with you and others, and we ask a few questions, here and there where it seems like it's appropriate or opportune. But for a lot of the interviews, we're just not saying much. We're just letting people kind of remember and reflect and, find whatever kinds of either new realizations or, kind of old associations, things that maybe they hadn't even thought about years. And just, one of the things that's really, I think, cool about this is that there are any number of different kinds of ritual spaces that we create to do this stuff in. And the first one is that interview space. And you just create that space. That's what you do. And you let someone think about themselves for a while. And if you think about that, there are very, very few places in the world where that actually happens anymore, period, or maybe ever, that like where you give someone permission to really just reflect. And one of the ways that we do this, and one of the things I think that's very interesting about it is that, another place that can happen is in a therapeutic context. Well, we don't actually, one of the things that we're very careful about in terms of how we position ourselves, how we think about ourselves, and how we represent ourselves is we're not therapists. We're definitely not there to like help anybody. If it helps you, that's fantastic. That makes us, that's obviously very gratifying. But there are plenty of people who A, don't need that, and B, are not interested, and for us, what we are doing is we're actually listening for stories, story and performance and what's going to, and also what's important to you. I mean, that's the fundamental thing, as writers, producers, and directors for these things, what we are really trying to identify is what we sense is most important to you. And we're wrong about that a lot. I mean, again, you've been through this process. So it's like, we will make our suggestions, but we always make our suggestions with the caveat that, this may be wrong. This is what I heard, but what I'm hearing, has to do with all kinds of other things. And it may be what I'm most interested in rather than what you're most interested in. And, what we want to make sure is that you are talking about the things that are most important to you. And that's, and so at some level, what we are is, we're instigators, and we are kind of maybe mirrors. I mean, imperfect mirrors, but mirrors. And that's, to me, that's what's always so gratifying and so fascinating about this process is that we, like, when you sit down for that interview, essentially for us, what we're doing is exercising curiosity, which is just really, I mean, I know that sounds simple, maybe that sounds abstract, I don't know, but it's to me, it's a truly profound exercise to just be curious, to just be open and to listen and to find that person who is with you wherever they are, whether that's like, in a really like nervous and maybe somewhat, withdrawn or restrained place, or maybe it's in a super open place, or maybe it's in a really difficult place, or maybe it's a really happy place. I don't know. Honestly, it's like you just have to kind of be present and open to that person in that moment. And again, that's for us, that's a place that you don't get to do very often. Yeah. I think mostly our attention span in the world is always directed. It's directed at a certain thing, and it's directed in a certain way, and we're looking for a certain outcome, and we want certain kinds of answers, and we want certain. And in this situation, basically, you just leave all that behind. All of that goes behind. You come into that room, and what you practice really is the discipline of being completely open and curious about who this person is and what they have to say. And that's just so cool, And then what we, the way the process is built from then on is, it's not about therapy. It's not about trauma. It's not all these things that we associate typically in the public voice with veterans. What it's about is your story, your performance, and how can we help you make sure that you are saying the things you want to say in the way you want to say them. And I think that one of the things that to me, and this is, I hear this when I hear you talk about your experience, and I don't know if this is, this is true or not, but this is what I hear, is that we are giving vets an opportunity to interact with each other and with their own stories in a way that is not happening in the rest of society.
Right.
In the rest of society, it's like trauma or heroism or you're a demon, or you're like, or you're, a mindless automaton. I mean, it's all these different stereotypes that we sort of use to conveniently understand the people around us. And it doesn't just apply to veterans. It applies to everybody. We all have these stereotypes, and we all use them to kind of like basically order our world. But when it comes to vets, these are really strong stereotypes,
Right.
and they're really like institutionalized. I mean, even within the military, you can see people use them to kind of understand one another, or understand different branches, or understand different MOSs, or understand different, and so, what we are doing, and the other thing about that is that, a lot of vets, that you come out and people expect you to go into therapy, and it's like,
Yep.
wait, what is that? That's just strange, and it's wonderful to me to see, since the Vietnam era, that there are so many services for vets when they come out. That's great. I have nothing against that. But the sort of like blanket association that vets are going to go into therapy or need therapy is just ridiculous.
Right. Everybody is different. I mean, that's one of the things that I really noticed getting together with the other 9 people up on stage with the Telling Project, was that every single story was different, and everybody's experience, what they took away from it was completely different. So,
Right.
How can you blanketly say anything about, the military as a whole, when every single person that's coming out of it is going to be completely different and act completely different?
Completely different. And people could have, 2 people could have really similar experiences.
Right.
And one person could walk away from it feeling like, wow, I really learned something amazing, and I'm ready to move on. And another person could walk away from it and be like, I don't know just what just happened, and I need to figure this out.
Right.
I mean, the thing is that the experiences themselves are very idiosyncratic, and the individuals are very idiosyncratic. And that's simply the truth of human beings. But for whatever reason, in the public mind, we don't grant that kind of latitude to military people. And I think that, there are any number of different things that are going on with that. But, the bottom line is that that's what we end up doing. And I think that what's unique to me about arts in relationship to the military is that arts aren't basically about, like, they're about stories, they're about images, they're about, sounds, they're about these things that are actually kind of raw data. And what we allow folks to do who are coming through our process is just kind of like, interact with their story in the way that they want to. So some people it is, for some people it is like, I've been through a lot of therapy and I want to talk about that. And I want to talk about how this has affected me. And I want to, and for some people it's like, this is a great story, I want to tell it. And for some people they're like, I'm really proud of this, I want to talk about it. For some people it's like, I haven't really thought about it, but let's see what happens. I mean, it's just totally like as you just said, it's totally different for everyone.
Yeah.
And when you're in an artistic space, it's not just that you have the room for that. It's that idiosyncrasy is completely encouraged. Like, that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be doing highly individual, highly individuated work. And that's what's really cool to me about working in the Telling Project, is that, like, every project, every production, and you've seen a few of them now, they're very different one from another.
Every single one.
And we have, we have a format, of course. We have like a structure that people move through because it gives narrative integrity and chronology and all these kinds of things that make it, at some level, a sort of functional theatrical piece. But within that, there's just a huge range of material. And, people, I think, at some level, a lot of my writer friends or fellow artist friends are kind of like, wow, how do you keep doing this year after year? And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm not doing the same thing from one minute to the next. These are always new.
Right.
And it's like, I mean, it's utterly engaging and fascinating work. It never gets old in any way. It's always like exciting and interesting and different. And just when you think that you've heard, oh yeah, this is kind of the same story that X was telling me, 3 years ago. Suddenly, they have a different perspective. Their circumstances take a turn that it was completely unlike the other person's. And suddenly we have we just have all kinds of. Not only do you have new material, but then you have this this new experience that actually reflects back on that other person's experience, and you start these echoes and resonances and all this. It's really cool. It's really cool. I could go on forever about it. So.
You seem to be getting a lot of attention. Also, I noticed on the website you had Michelle Obama up there shaking some of the veterans' hands, and I kind of wanted to hear what that story was.
Yeah, that was actually really early on. That happened in 2000 and actually it was 2008 of that year. So it was the first year that we were doing it, and it was the first year we'd done it. It wasn't even an organization at that point. We'd done telling in Eugene, and we got contacted. No, I'm wrong. It was 2009. I'm sorry. It was the second year that we'd been doing it. And so we'd done two projects at that point. We'd done one in Eugene at the University of Oregon, and we'd done one in Portland at Portland State University. And one of the cast members in Portland was friends with a guy who worked for Service Nation in D.C. And they were both vets. They'd served in Afghanistan together. And he told him about this project, and he got a hold of me, this guy, Ross, and his last name, Ross Cohen. He said, we're putting on this Veterans Day event at Lisner Auditorium in Washington, D.C., and we want to have a kind of keynote. We were wondering if you guys would put together a project for us. And I said, hell yeah. I mean, of course, God. And at that point, nobody knew who was going to be there. But we were like, yeah, bring us, they paid all of our costs. We didn't charge them anything in terms of labor or anything like that. They just flew us to DC and put us up. And within, I guess it was sort of the last week, they had been working on getting Michelle Obama and Jill Biden to show up for this thing. But it's Michelle Obama and Jill Biden. Veterans Day is probably they had a stack of events that they were going to that was probably a foot high. I mean, it was
I'm sure
their demands on their time, especially because at that point, well, not even especially, but at that point they were starting their veterans focus in both of their agendas. And so they just had a ton of obligations. But they came to this thing, and we didn't really know until the day before whether they were going to show up or not. They had this, well, yeah, they might, and maybe not. And that's kind of the way it works in DC. You know how that works. So, it was a bunch of different nonprofit organizations who were working with veterans, and they all had to have their 15 minutes of speaking. And the event went on for hours. I mean, it just went on and on and on, which was fine. Whatever. We were the closing kind of presentation. But, there were all these nonprofits, there were all these people there, and they were going to, Michelle Obama and Jill Biden were going to come on, do, a quick speech, do a rope line walk, and then they had to go on to their next event. And we were the only people there we were an actual group of veterans and military family members. There were some other vets there, but we were the only people who were it was 9 of us, 9 vets, and or 6 of us, I guess. And Ross Cohen just said, "Hey, do you guys want to meet the First Lady?" And we're like, "Well, yeah." And so they pulled us backstage, and we waited backstage for a while, and she came out, and she was just she's tall and amazing. She's an incredible presence. I don't know if you've ever met her.
I have not.
Super warm, just and lovely, and she's really kind of an extraordinary presence, as I said.
Yeah.
And she shook everybody's hand, and she said thank you, and we got a photograph, and that photograph has been with us since. And I don't know how much work that photograph has done, but I bet it's done a lot. I mean, it's at that point, like I said, we weren't an organization, and we weren't, a project even. We had just done this performance, and then they had asked us to come and be a part of their thing. So it was great. That was a really cool opportunity, and since then we've had a lot of other cool stuff happen as well. Actually most recently we've had some productions, in New York with VAP, but also, at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, which is one of the premier regional theaters in the world. We've done 2 productions with them. Really thrilled about that relationship, and it's ongoing.
Excellent.
Yeah, and we were webcast by PBS nationally last year, and broadcast regionally in San Antonio and PBS network there, and we're We're working on a number of projects this year with other PBS affiliates around the country, kind of extending the reach of a given project, but still keeping it on a community level. That's one of the great things about PBS is that they have a community mandate in terms of how they do their programming, and we're working with a bunch of them to do these performances and use both the interviews and the rehearsals, and then also the performances themselves as content, and they can proliferate it out even further into the community than we were able to. So,
what other performances do you have coming up?
Oh man, we've got a lot. So let's see. We're working on projects in Lansing, Michigan, Jackson, and Hattiesburg, Mississippi, 2 separate projects. Pensacola, Florida. We're going to go back to Minneapolis. We're in Wichita, Kansas, St. Louis, Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri, Palm Springs, California, East End of Long Island. We're working on a project in College Park. We're coming back to Maryland again.
Excellent. Very cool.
Yeah. We're talking to some people in Atlanta right now. That's still at a very early stage, but I think that we really would love to get to Atlanta. It's such a huge military community there, and that would be a wonderful place to go and do this as well. We're working on a couple different ones here in Texas. And let's see, man, we've got a ton of stuff going on. So we're going to be doing a dozen in the next year at least. And I actually suspect we'll be doing a few more than that.
And so you don't have people already lined up for these, right? You don't already have veterans for each of these?
For the Hattiesburg and Jackson, Mississippi ones, we've got our cast. For Lansing, we've got a good portion of them, but we're still working on getting some more people there. For the East End, we are about, 3/4 of the way there. And then for the rest of them, we haven't actually even started putting together the cast. Oh, no, actually, in Kansas City, we're in the early processes of putting that one together, putting together cast. And we've got some good connections there, but anything, that comes out of this would be fantastic. Palm Springs is an interesting one. We're having a little bit of a harder time getting that one together. A, because the area is it's not super densely populated. But B, because we're doing a very specific one there, which is the partner that we're working with there is really interested in doing one that is all female vets.
Oh,
and we've got a few cast members who are already excited and on board, but we need more. And so any kind of reach that you might have there would be great.
How would they sign up for it?
So you can just email the Telling Project, info@thetellingproject.org.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's super easy. It goes straight into my box, and I'll get back to you, within an hour. I checking my email obsessively as everybody does. But yeah, especially for prospective performers, and actually, anybody anywhere, if you're interested in performing, we keep a running list, and we will come to your area. We will. I mean, we just, at this point, we have way more requests for performances than we can respond to. And we're working on our funding is, it's basically contingent on our funding. And as our funding increases and as we gain more support, we are able to do more programming. And, we anticipate being everywhere in this country at some point in the next few years.
Outstanding. Before we get into the final 3 questions, I wanted to point out a success story that comes out of the Telling Project, aside from me, of course. But Josh Wiley, who was part of the cast for the Library of Congress event, Josh Wiley, I bumped into him he's with the Mission Continues now, and he's doing great work over there. We worked on a project together over in D.C., revitalizing a school. And I brought the Veteran Artist Program team over there. We got some local artists that did murals on the outside and on the inside of the school. But I bumped into him and I said, "Hey, I know you." But he said that the Telling Project that was his gateway drug, I think.
Yeah, well, Josh actually, he was with Mission Continues for 2 years until about maybe 2 months ago now.
Oh,
and he's in the DC area now, and he's starting his own organization called Soldier On.
Outstanding. That's great.
Yeah, he's doing amazing. I love Josh. Josh and I, he's done a bunch of work with us, doing transcriptions and also other stuff. His interest is right in line with the kind of work that we do as well. He did a great fellowship coming out of his. So his Mission Continues fellowship was with the Center for International Journalism or something like that. It's one of these nonprofits in DC that works with journalists, and he did a great fellowship with the Mission Continues, and then went on to work with the Mission Continues. And Soldier On is just right in line with that. I'll let you talk to him about that at some point, because he's doing incredible work. He's doing a really, really cool project. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag because I don't know where he is in terms of that, but it's really something. It's really something. And I have nothing but just tremendous respect for Josh. And we've had, a ton of people go on to a crazy variety of stuff afterwards. And, it's hard. I don't take any responsibility for that in terms of the project propelling them in any particular direction. But I do know that, it helps. It helps with like public presentation and comfort in your own skin and all these different kinds of things that some people don't struggle with that. I think typically most of us do.
Yeah.
We all, have just nervousness and social shyness, or anxiety seems like maybe a strong language for most of us, but nevertheless, it's a kind of powerful thing. And as you pointed out, putting your experience into a narrative is a very powerful experience. It's a very powerful experience and a very empowering one. It allows you to kind of reflect and understand and accept and make sense of a lot of things. And I hope that's had, a really positive impact for a lot of people. We've had, some really cool stuff happen. Like one of our performers down in Tampa Bay, William Scott Owens, Army veteran, after the last show, so they have one more show now, but after the last of the public shows, I think it was 2 days later, he moved into a house with his family that had been provided by an organization in Texas that built houses for vets.
Awesome.
And so and that process had been going for a while, but it was kind of like this really cool thing where he got this chance to tell his story, and he was really excited about that and felt really incredible about it, and then transitioned out of, rental housing and into his own home, which he has mortgage free. Just sort of that was sort of a wonderful thing to sort of be a bystander on and watch, and hear him talk about that and see him, posting on Facebook and so forth.
That's great. That's awesome. All right, Jonathan, I think we're about ready to jump into the final 3 questions here.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I am.
Okay. Question number 1. Who would you like to hear on a future episode of Veteran Resource Podcast?
I would love to hear Josh Wiley.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah, I kind of set that one up, didn't I? I didn't know you were going to ask that for the listening audience. I did not know that was going to be a question. Yeah, no, I would love to hear Josh talk about the project he's doing. He's, like I said, he's doing really incredible work.
I will reach out to him.
And another one that I think would be a wonderful person to hear from is Ron Pierce. And Ron Pierce is the senior director for the initiative at PBS, the national initiative at PBS, which is Veterans Voices. I think that's the name of the initiative. But he started last November, and he's doing some great work there, and really trying to open up a lot of avenues for veteran programming at PBS. And it's one of their it's going to be one of their central initiatives for the next few years. And he's going to be a big part of that.
Excellent. All right. Question number 2. What upcoming project has you fired up right now?
Like I said, we've got a dozen projects coming up. The one in Palm Springs is really exciting, but we actually have a targeted project that we're in the process of developing right now. It's not clear exactly when it's going to happen, and it's not clear exactly who we're going to be partnering with. And we have a lot of people who are very interested. I don't want to speak for anybody yet because we haven't actually hammered out any of those details. But we have this fantastic group of females, all of whom have served in MOSs that put them in the line of fire. Basically, they were serving in combat without actually being in what is considered by the military to be combat positions. Because as you know, Jeremy, there's a piece of military regulation that was passed in 1994, which was the Exclusion Act, which kept females out of combat positions specifically. But due to the sort of evolution of the military and also due to the necessities that came up through fighting two wars in Muslim areas where for male soldiers to actually deal with females is, especially if you're in rural or traditional areas, it's just a no-no. You can't do that. Like, it's a huge cultural taboo. So you have to have females available. Plus, there are just MOSs that, they're not considered combat positions, but you're outside of the wire all the time. And so we have this fantastic cast of 5 females, and we are putting together the funding and the partnerships to create this performance, which we're going to do here in Austin. Hopefully, we'll do a run here, and then we would like to do an East Coast, a Northern Midwest, and a West Coast run as well with the original cast with these 5 veterans. And I'm very, very excited about that. It's going to be really fun, and it's going to be just a very. They've all performed with us before. They're wonderful people. I can't wait.
Outstanding. Okay, question number 3. If you woke up tomorrow and you found out that somebody had made an anonymous donation of $10 million, what would you do with the money?
Programming. I mean, this is the thing. Well, okay, so there are a lot of things that we could do with that. And one of the things that we've been doing in the last couple of years is really structuring how we're going to expand as we get more resources, because essentially it's a matter of resources for us right now. We have more demand for these projects than we have ability to fulfill by many times at this point. So what we're looking at in terms of expansion is what we would like to do is establish regional representatives of the project around the country. And these would be people who work for the Telling Project, who are writers and producers themselves, and basically work within that region to generate to generate and execute projects. So what we'll be doing through that is even more regionally focusing the work that we do. So essentially what we do right now is we partner with community organizations and individuals to create these things. We instigate, we shepherd the process through, but essentially what we want to do is be able to hand it off to those community partners as much as possible, because we want it to be a community project. We want these folks, this conversation, to be something that community takes possession of. So in establishing some of these regional representatives of the Telling Project, we're going to further focus that in that way. And we would also be able to then do many more projects a year. So if we broke the nation down into, say, 6 regions, we would have 6 regional representatives. Each of them could do 6 to 8 projects a year. That would be, 36 to 48 projects. Plus, we would still have our headquarters here in Austin. And what we would be doing here in Austin is obviously we would be responsible for a region ourselves, but we would also be piloting projects like this one with females in combat. There are other projects we would love to do similarly to that, which would be, working with TBI caregivers and TBI survivors, working with survivors of military sexual trauma, working with people who had done, certain kinds of perhaps less understood military service, basically kind of targeting different kinds of ideas and stories, which we could then do a pilot project here in Austin and come up with the way that we felt like it would work best, do a run here, get some national exposure for that pilot project, and then each of these regional representatives could then do projects in their region working with that population there as well. And so what we do is we expand, we deepen, we make the conversation even more eloquent, and we also focus it more regionally. That's one of the things that we want to do.
Very cool.
The other thing that we would like to do, and seeing as you're saying $10 million, I'll go ahead and start talking about this as well. The other thing we would like to do is, in keeping our headquarters here, we would establish an actual brick and mortar theater here. And the theater would be capable. It would be video, audio, and print publishing capable. And so what we would be able to do then is have performances here in this space. We would know what the parameters are. We would know exactly how to shoot it. We would know exactly how to edit it. We would know exactly how to make it into a performance that could then be proliferated. And essentially what we would be able to do is start an online telling project channel.
That would be great.
Right. And not just a channel where people can go and watch performances, but a channel that's actually keyword searchable. So what we are actually doing is creating also an oral history database that is fully searchable. So we would be able to have it, in terms of, we could have it text, we could have it audio in terms of, podcast, however that worked out best. And we could have the actual performances themselves. So we would have a huge amount of material that we could make available as this kind of essentially archive, an archive of military experience. We could distribute that in any number of different kinds of ways. We could make it available in any number of different kinds of ways. But essentially what we want to be able to do is have a facility where we are able to make sure that the quality of the actual material itself is absolutely top notch. And that would be, 10 million wouldn't get us that facility, but 10 million would get us close to, it would put us on the path to getting that facility. In other words, it would be something that we could work on that foundation very easily.
If there's anybody out there with $10 million and is looking for a great place to put it, you just heard Jonathan tell you how it could be put to good use. And
give us a call.
I was just going to say, Jonathan, for that person with the $10 million or for anybody else, how would they find out more about the Telling Project or get in contact with you?
Well, absolutely. And our website is thetellingproject.org. Email contact is info@thetellingproject.org. And, we have all of our contact information on the website. I could tell you here, but it's probably better. Go there and look. You'll see some great images. You'll see some wonderful content. You can get updated on where we're going to be and when for our upcoming performances. Like I said, our practice is curiosity and conversation. We want to be inviting and creating that in every element of our organization. So we would love to hear from folks.
Excellent. I will make sure that I put all of those links in the show notes as well so that people can more easily find the website and all of the contact information.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jeremy. And thank you for doing this. This is incredible work. I'm really, really excited about this what you're doing. It's really cool and a great idea.
Thank you. That means a lot. And thanks for being on the show. This has been a really, really fun interview.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear from you. And like I said, we're going to probably be back out in Maryland pretty soon. So we'll probably see you then.
Outstanding. We'll have to stop and grab a beer.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening to episode 11 of the Veteran Resource Podcast. If you would like to check out the show notes, they are at veteranpodcast.com/011. And we will see you next week for episode 12.